Have you ever looked at a couple celebrating 30 years together and thought, that's love? Maybe you saw the photo, the anniversary dinner, the smiling faces, the grandchildren gathered around the table. And maybe a part of you felt hopeful. But another part, a quieter part, wondered something you weren't supposed to wonder. What actually kept them together? Because if we're being honest, you've probably loved someone deeply before, maybe more deeply than you ever admitted. And yet she still left. Or maybe you left. Either way, love was there. So why wasn't that enough? And if love wasn't enough, then what exactly is holding together the people who make it 30 years? Before we go any further, if this conversation feels like it landed in your life at exactly the right moment, subscribe and stay with me. Not because I want another number on a screen, but because some truths take time to unfold, and I have a feeling this one is going to stay with you. Now, here's the uncomfortable part. Most men spend years chasing the feeling of love, the excitement, the chemistry, the certainty, that rush you feel when your phone lights up with her name, the way a room changes when she walks into it, the feeling that you've finally found the missing piece. And yet, if you talk privately with couples who've been together for 3 decades, something strange happens. Very few of them describe their relationship that way anymore. Not because they're unhappy, not because the love disappeared, but because what remained was something entirely different. Something most people never learn to value until life forces them to. I once sat across from an elderly man during a counselling session. His wife had passed away 8 months earlier. 42 years together. 42. When people asked if he missed her, he always said yes. But one afternoon he said something that stayed with me. He looked down at his hands and whispered, "I don't miss being loved. I miss being known." Known. Not admired, not desired, not validated, known. The difference is enormous. Because admiration is easy in the beginning. People admire the version of you they're still discovering. Desire is easy too. Mystery creates attraction. Novelty creates excitement. But being known, being truly known, means someone has seen your worst moods, your insecurities, your failures, the weird habits you tried to hide, the dreams you abandoned, the disappointments you never talk about. And somehow they stayed. Not because every day felt romantic, not because the butterflies survived 30 years, but because something deeper replaced them. Most men don't realize this until much later. They think they're searching for the woman who will make them feel something powerful. But eventually life asks a different question. Not, who makes you feel alive? But, who remains when life stops feeling exciting? Because life always does, not permanently, but often enough. There are seasons where careers become exhausting, parents get sick, children struggle, money becomes tight, health changes, stress moves into the house without asking permission. And during those seasons, relationships reveal what they're actually built on. This is where many people become confused. They mistake the absence of intense emotion for the absence of love. They look at a long-term couple and think, they've lost the spark. Maybe. Or maybe they found something more durable. The truth most people avoid is that feelings are naturally unstable. They rise. They fall. The strange thing about lasting relationships is that they rarely look impressive while they're happening. Nobody posts photos of ordinary Tuesdays. Nobody celebrates the 1,000 small decisions that quietly hold 2 people together. The internet loves dramatic moments. The proposal, the wedding, the anniversary trip, the surprise gift. But 30 years is not built in dramatic moments. It's built in ordinary ones. And that's exactly why so many people underestimate what they're looking at. Imagine a man coming home after a difficult day. Not a catastrophic day, just one of those exhausting days that slowly drain something from you. The meeting that went badly, the unexpected bill, the disappointment you didn't tell anyone about. He walks through the door. His wife asks how he's doing. He says, "I'm fine." And she knows he's not. Not because she's psychic, not because they have some magical connection, but because she's watched his face for 20 years. She recognizes the difference between tired and defeated, between frustrated and worried, between silence and loneliness. That level of familiarity doesn't sound romantic, at least not at first. But think about it. Most people spend their entire lives hoping someone will understand them, really understand them. Yet they spend most of their relationships trying to appear impressive, stronger than they are, more confident than they are, more successful than they are, more emotionally unaffected than they are, especially men. I've noticed something heartbreaking over the years. Many men believe they must constantly earn love, earn respect, earn attention, earn worth. So they become performers, not intentionally, just gradually, without realizing it. They show the strongest version of themselves, the most capable version, the version least likely to be rejected, and eventually they become trapped inside that version, because now someone loves the image. But the real man behind it remains hidden. This creates a loneliness that's difficult to explain. You can be lying next to someone every night and still feel unseen. You can hear, "I love you," and still wonder, if she knew everything, would she stay? That's a painful question. Maybe you've asked it before, maybe only in the privacy of your own mind. The couples who last aren't perfect because they never face that fear. They're different because over time they stop performing. Life wears the performance down. Eventually illness arrives, failure arrives, aging arrives, stress arrives, and suddenly there's no energy left to maintain the character you've been playing. The real person starts showing up, the exhausted version, the uncertain version, the vulnerable version. And something important happens. The relationship either deepens or it cracks. Because attraction can survive performance, but intimacy cannot. Real intimacy requires exposure, not physical exposure, emotional exposure. The willingness to let another human being see parts of yourself that don't look impressive. Most people talk about vulnerability like it's a beautiful experience. Honestly, it usually doesn't feel beautiful. It feels terrifying. It feels like standing emotionally unarmed in front of someone whose opinion matters deeply, which is exactly why so few people do it completely. But the longer I work with people, the more convinced I become of this. The strongest relationships are not built on love alone. They're built on emotional safety. And emotional safety is far rarer than attraction. You can feel attracted to hundreds of people throughout your life. You can experience chemistry unexpectedly. You can feel desire almost instantly. But emotional safety? That takes years. Years of consistency, years of honesty, years of discovering that disagreement doesn't automatically mean abandonment. Years of realizing you can tell the truth without losing the relationship. Most men don't think they're looking for emotional safety. It sounds too soft, too abstract, too psychological. But watch what happens when a man finally finds it. His shoulders relax, his guard drops, his conversations become deeper, his laughter becomes genuine, his mind becomes quieter. Because he's no longer spending every day protecting himself from rejection. And that's when another uncomfortable truth appears. Many long-term couples aren't still together because they never changed. They're still together because they allowed each other to change. And that's a completely different thing. The man she married at 25 isn't the man sitting beside her at 55. He can't be. Life changes him. Loss changes him. Responsibility changes him. Success changes him. Failure changes him. And the same thing happens to her. The real challenge isn't staying in love with who someone was. It's learning to recognize who they've become. Again, and again, and again. Most relationships end long before they physically end because people stop updating their view of each other. They keep relating to an old version, an outdated version, a version that no longer exists. The couples who make it 30 years do something different, something subtle, something powerful. They keep meeting each other for the first time, not through excitement, not through novelty, but through curiosity. And that curiosity becomes one of the strongest forms of love a human being can experience. Even though almost nobody calls it that. There's a moment that happens in almost every long relationship. Most people never talk about it. There's no anniversary card for it, no movie scene built around it. No one warns you it's coming, but it comes anyway. And when it does, it quietly changes everything. It's the moment when you realize your partner is not the answer to your loneliness. Now stay with me here, because this is where many people become uncomfortable. When we're young, we often imagine love as a rescue, not consciously, but somewhere deep inside. We think the right relationship will finally settle the restlessness, the uncertainty, the ache we've carried for years. We think another person will somehow complete a story that feels unfinished, and for a while it can feel that way. In the beginning, relationships create a beautiful illusion. You're constantly connected, constantly thinking about each other, constantly sharing. The loneliness gets quieter, the doubts become easier to ignore, life feels brighter. Then something strange happens. Time passes, real life arrives. The relationship becomes normal, and suddenly the feelings you thought love had solved begin showing up again. The insecurity, the fear, the emptiness, the questions. Only now they're sitting beside a relationship instead of outside one. This surprises people, especially men, because many men spend years believing that if they could just find the right woman, everything inside them would finally settle down. Then they find someone wonderful and discover they're still carrying themselves with them, the same mind, the same wounds, the same unresolved fears, the same inner battles. At first, this feels disappointing, almost unfair, but eventually it becomes liberating, because now you're no longer asking your partner to do something impossible. You're no longer asking her to save you from yourself, and that changes the relationship completely. I remember speaking with a man in his 60s, married for 37 years. When I asked him what had changed most over time, he laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one. The kind that comes from recognizing your younger self. He said, "I spent the first 10 years wanting my wife to make me happy." Then he paused. The next 20 years learning that wasn't her job. That sentence carried decades of wisdom, not because happiness doesn't matter, it does, but because many people unknowingly place impossible expectations on the people they love. They expect one person to be their source of excitement, their source of confidence, their source of comfort, their source of purpose, their source of validation, their source of emotional stability. That's an enormous burden, too enormous for any human being. Eventually it crushes the relationship, not because either person is bad, because the expectation itself is unsustainable. And here's where things become interesting. The strongest long-term couples often become stronger after they stop trying to complete each other. Think about that. Not when they merge into one identity, not when they become inseparable, not when they lose themselves. When they stop demanding completion from each other. Because love becomes healthier when it exists between two whole people. Not two people desperately trying to fill each other's empty spaces. A lot of men secretly fear this idea because they think independence creates distance. But mature love works differently. Mature love creates connection without ownership, closeness without control, commitment without captivity. You choose each other, again and again, not because you have no other option, not because you're afraid to leave, not because you're dependent, because you genuinely want to stay. And there's something profoundly moving about that. When someone remains after decades, not out of obligation, not out of fear, not because they need you to survive, but because after seeing who you really are, they still choose you. That choice carries a different weight than romance, a different depth than attraction, a different meaning than passion. And yet, most people spend their entire lives chasing passion while overlooking choice. Maybe because passion feels exciting, choice feels ordinary. But here's what nobody tells you. Choice becomes beautiful when it's repeated long enough. One day becomes a week becomes a year becomes a decade becomes 30 years, and suddenly what looked ordinary was actually extraordinary. Not because the relationship was perfect, not because they never questioned things, not because they never struggled, but because they kept returning, kept rebuilding, kept choosing, even when life became complicated, even when they became different people than they once were. And that brings us to perhaps the most misunderstood truth about lasting relationships. A truth that explains why some couples survive storms that should have broken them, while others fall apart despite having all the chemistry in the world. Because what keeps people together for 30 years isn't found in their best moments. It's revealed in their worst ones. Most people believe relationships are tested during the big crises, the betrayal, the financial collapse, the devastating diagnosis, the major life transition. And yes, those moments matter. But after years of listening to people's stories, I've come to believe that relationships are usually shaped somewhere else. In the quiet disappointments, the repeated misunderstandings, the ordinary hurts that never make headlines. Because almost nobody leaves a 30-year relationship because of one bad Tuesday. They leave because thousands of small experiences slowly changed how they felt inside the relationship. That's what makes this difficult to see. The damage is often gradual, invisible, accumulated, like water slowly wearing down stone. And the same thing is true in the opposite direction. The strongest bonds are rarely built through grand gestures. They're built through tiny moments that seem insignificant at the time. A hand resting on your shoulder after a difficult conversation, someone remembering a detail you mentioned months ago, a quiet check-in after a stressful week, a look across the room that says, "I know exactly what you're thinking." These moments don't create fireworks, they create trust. And trust is often mistaken for something boring, until it's gone. Then suddenly it becomes priceless. I once worked with a couple married for over 3 decades. When people looked at them, they assumed they had some secret, some extraordinary compatibility, some rare relationship talent. The truth was far less glamorous and far more meaningful. They disappointed each other constantly, not dramatically, normally, like every human being does. Forgotten errands, bad moods, miscommunication, moments of selfishness, moments of neglect, moments where one person needed more than the other could give. Nothing unusual. What made them different wasn't the absence of disappointment, it was their response to it. They didn't interpret every mistake as evidence that the relationship was failing. And that distinction changes everything. Because when you're younger, every conflict can feel enormous. Every misunderstanding feels significant. Every disappointment feels like a verdict. Maybe we're wrong for each other. Maybe this shouldn't be this hard. Maybe the feeling is gone. But long-term relationships teach a more complicated lesson. Sometimes your partner disappoints you because they're human, not because they don't care. Sometimes they misunderstand you because they're carrying their own stress, not because they're emotionally unavailable. Sometimes they fail you in a moment, not because they're incapable of loving you. The problem is that pain has a way of creating stories. A missed phone call becomes rejection. A distracted conversation becomes evidence. A bad week becomes a prediction about the future. And once those stories take hold, people stop responding to reality. They start responding to assumptions. That's where distance begins. Not in conflict, in interpretation. Because two people can experience the exact same event and assign completely different meanings to it. One sees exhaustion, the other sees indifference. One sees stress, the other sees rejection. One sees a difficult season, the other sees the beginning of the end. This is why emotional maturity becomes more important than chemistry over time. Chemistry creates connection, but maturity protects it. Without maturity, every challenge feels threatening, every disagreement feels personal, every imperfection feels dangerous, and eventually, the relationship becomes exhausted from defending itself. The couples who survive decades together learn something many people never learn. They stop asking, "Is my partner perfect?" and start asking, "Can we repair what gets damaged?" That's a completely different question, because every relationship experiences damage, every single one. The issue is never whether mistakes happen. The issue is whether repair happens afterward, whether pride wins, or understanding wins, whether distance grows, or conversations happen, whether resentment settles in, or honesty clears it out. And here's what strikes me most. When men talk about relationships that truly change their lives, they rarely describe perfection. They describe reliability. They describe feeling supported during difficult years. They describe someone staying when life became messy. They describe forgiveness, patience, understanding, the things that sound ordinary until you're desperately in need of them. That's when you realize something important. The qualities that create attraction are not always the same qualities that sustain a life together. And if you're still together after 30 years, the real reason may have very little to do with constantly feeling in love. It may have everything to do with what happened every time love became difficult. Because anyone can stay when everything feels easy. The deeper question is, Who are you to each other when life stops cooperating? That's where the real answer lives. And it's also where the final truth begins to emerge. A truth that most people spend decades misunderstanding. A truth about love itself. So, if you're still together after 30 years, it's not because of love. At least not in the way most people define it. And that's the part that catches people off guard. Because when we hear the word love, we often picture emotion, a feeling, a state, something we experience, something we fall into, something we either have or don't have. But after enough years, that definition starts to feel incomplete. Not wrong, just incomplete. Because feelings alone cannot explain 30 years. They cannot explain staying through uncertainty. They cannot explain rebuilding after disappointment. They cannot explain choosing patience when frustration would be easier. They cannot explain showing up on days when neither person feels particularly inspiring. Something else has to be present, something deeper, something quieter. And perhaps that's what love eventually becomes. Not a feeling that carries the relationship, but a relationship that teaches you what love really is. I want you to imagine something. Imagine two people standing together at 25. They're full of plans, full of expectations, full of assumptions about who they'll become. Then imagine those same people standing together at 55. Between those two moments exists an entire universe. Losses no one predicted, victories no one expected, mistakes, growth, heartbreak, recovery, versions of themselves that didn't exist yet. The astonishing thing isn't that they remained identical. The astonishing thing is that they learned how to remain connected while constantly changing. Because that's the challenge nobody prepares us for. Not finding love, remaining connected through transformation. The man you are today is not the man you were 10 years ago, and if you're fortunate enough to keep growing, the man you'll be 10 years from now will be different too. Life doesn't stand still, neither do people. Which means long-term love is not one decision, it's thousands of decisions. Thousands of moments where two people quietly say, I see who you're becoming. I'm willing to learn you again. I'm willing to adjust. I'm willing to stay curious. That kind of love rarely looks dramatic. It rarely goes viral. It doesn't create movie scenes. It creates lives. And maybe that's more impressive. There's another thing I've noticed. The happiest long-term couples rarely speak about happiness as often as younger couples do. Instead, they talk about partnership, trust, friendship, respect, shared history. At first, those words sound less romantic, until you think about what they actually mean. Shared history. Think about that phrase. There is something profoundly human about being witnessed across decades. Someone remembers who you were before the successes, before the failures, before the grey hair, before life humbled you. Someone remembers the younger version of you and still recognizes the man standing in front of them now. That kind of witnessing changes people. It softens them, grounds them, reminds them they don't have to constantly prove who they are. And maybe that's why so many widows and widowers describe losing a spouse in such similar ways. They don't only grieve the person, they grieve the witness, the keeper of memories, the one person who knew the entire story, not the edited version, the whole thing. The older I get, the less convinced I become that lasting relationships survive because two people never stop loving each other. And the more convinced I become that they survive because they learn how to care for something larger than themselves. The relationship itself, the shared life, the space between them. They protect it, repair it, invest in it, return to it, again and again, for years, for decades, and eventually something remarkable happens. What began as attraction becomes attachment. What began as excitement becomes trust. What began as passion becomes understanding. What began as love becomes home. Not perfect, not effortless, not free from conflict. Home. And maybe that's the answer hiding underneath all those anniversary photos. The answer most people miss. If two people are still together after 30 years, it isn't because they woke up every morning overwhelmed by romantic feelings. It's because they built something stronger than feelings alone. Something capable of surviving the days when feelings were confusing, or distant, or tired. Something that could carry them when emotion couldn't. So if you're looking for a relationship that lasts, Don't just ask yourself who makes your heart race. Ask yourself who helps you feel known, who helps you feel safe enough to be honest, who keeps learning who you are, who allows you to keep becoming. Because in the end, the couples who make it 30 years aren't usually the ones who found perfect love. They're the ones who learned that real love was never the destination. It was the way they walked the road together. And somehow, after all that time, they still chose not to walk it alone.